Lesson 3, Part 2. So, you're going to be told again, I would highly, highly recommend that you get the PowerPoint up from Canvas and follow along with this because there's going to be a lot of information on this, especially on the 45 years of this with military actions. I cannot possibly talk about it all, but I'm going to talk about the major themes of each one. So, again, be listening for how diplomacy worked, how conflict worked, and then more importantly, the causes and effects that I've been establishing this whole time. So I'm going to keep a running list of military actions on slides that look like this. And the first said thing that's kind of a military action is our arms race. We find out that the Soviet Union actually detonates their first atomic bomb in 1949. So, not wanting to be outdone, we decided we should build something bigger, and we call it the hydrogen bomb. So, this is the circle of how the first atomic bomb was when we dropped it. This is the detonation radius of the hydrogen bomb. So, quite bigger, quite badder, if you will. But why this matters to us is that the Soviet Union is going to quickly come up with their own hydrogen bomb shortly thereafter. So, this is what's going to spark something called the arms race. Who can have more bombs than the other one? And the Soviet Union basically didn't really have a whole lot of money, which is going to come back to bite them here in a little bit. But our president at the time, Eisenhower, was in full force of this stockpiling because he didn't want to commit a whole lot of people to fighting wars with the Soviet Union when we had the military technology to basically just drop a bomb on them and basically end it. So here's a chart to show how many nuclear bombs each country had roughly at the end of each of the 5-year increments. And notice we were outbuilding them 5 to 1. So we had the brains, we had the money. So the arms race refers to the blank of nuclear weapons by the United States and the Soviet Union. The second said military action that's worth noting during the Cold War is the Korean War, the actual first hot war during this time period. But it wasn't with the United States and the Soviet Union, it was with the United States and Korea. And it all boils back to World War II. The North was being helped out by the Soviet Union. The South was, Korea was being helped out by the United States. And when the North is going to attack the South trying to spread communism, we said nope. And that's when we're going to fight back and we're going to prevent it. Because remember, our foreign policy was containment. So that is kind of why this is the big deal. All right. So again, the happenings that are worth noting. China is going to become communist. I'm going to talk a lot about this later. I have a whole lesson towards this, but containment in this case, we tried to get the another person in power that was not going to bring communism into China. However, the needs of the people were just way too much, and they actually voted him in. So it happened. It spread. So when you go into the Korean War itself, we did not want all of Korea to become communist along with China. So that's why we kind of went a little bit all in on this. Just fighting a war, we couldn't let it happen. And it all again boiled down to we did not want communism to spread from the north to the south. So again, we fought a war, and it was this guy. This was Harry S. Truman. And again, we were in control of the UN pretty much at the time. And he didn't declare war. He basically said, go help the South Korea, which with US troops or US UN troops. And that's why he didn't have to declare war. So that's kind of why the Korean War is the biggest of deals, if you will. So China, they were getting involved because we were pushing so far the north back, going back to this slide. We were pushing so far north that we actually got dangerously close to China. They didn't like it. So they felt that their way of life was under threat. So that's why they kind of committed their troops. But the end result of the Korean War is the biggest deal. It just ended in a stalemate. It went way back to how it was before, that there's a North, there's a South, there's a communist, there's a not communist. So the Korean War is actually still technically going because it was all just one massive ceasefire where basically we're just going to stop shooting at each other. So that's the Korean War. And again, the lasting effects, if you look, US soldiers died, US soldiers were hurt, and we are now committing a whole lot of money to make sure that the communist way of life is not spreading. So the Korean War was an act of blank of communism by the United States. So, number three, the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Again, there's a lot to this. So I'm not going to be able to talk about everything. So make sure we'll go back and reread it. But long story short, Cuba becomes communist. They make friends with Nikita Khrushchev in the Soviet Union because the way of life in Cuba is way low. So, when people are low and desperate, they're going to bring in a way of life that's going to promise a better life or a way of thinking that's going to be better. And if people are really poor, saying that nobody is going to be super rich, nobody's going to own land, that's pretty appealing. And that's what Fidel Castro was basically preaching. But what we don't like about it is that communism is now 90 miles away from US soil. And we're going to have this wild idea of we're going to spark some sort of invasion to make sure that communism doesn't last. And that thing is called the Bay of Pigs, where we're going to take Cuban exiles and we're going to train them in military tactics, drop them into Cuba, and basically have them fight their way back into freedoms. So this was really Dwight D. Eisenhower's plan, but it was JFK that actually carried it out. And it failed. It failed incredibly bad. So pretty much everybody was caught or killed. And all the while, JFK is made to look like a fool because this was really one of his first real acts as president. So he had a lot to overcome with this. But again, containment failed. So when JFK meets with Nikita Khrushchev, that bad blood is going to start. That bad blood of why are you attacking our friend of Cuba is going to lead to hostile acts. So this is diplomacy right here. And it failed because while we were doing this, they pulled a sneaky majiki on us. They built the Berlin Wall. And while they're building the Berlin Wall, they actually started moving missiles into Cuba. And that's even more dangerous for us because you're going to notice that now with that rocket technology from the space race and them now having a nuclear bomb, this is now every major city in the North American continent is now within reach of these missiles. So we had to do some heavy diplomacy right away. And luckily, we were able to work out a deal with the Soviet Union that we were going to get their missiles off of Cuba if we agreed to take our missiles out of Turkey. So that's right. We did not like it when they had missiles pointed at us, but all the while we had missiles pointed at them. But diplomacy fixed this. So it kind of gives us hope for the future that people can talk things out and not fight things out. So, question for you. In order to remove nuclear missiles from Cuba, the United States had to agree to remove their missiles from. And going into the last one, the Vietnam War. So, the Vietnam War, again, an act of containment. Different guy, same idea. Vietnam being a really poor country, named Ho Chi Minh is going to have this wild idea of we should make the land free to the people. And it kicks way back to World War II because France is actually in control of Vietnam. And since France is our homie, we kind of overlooked it. We kind of forced people or wanted people to decolonize. But with France, we're like, nah, you can keep doing it. And in the middle of the Cold War, we didn't want to piss off another friend. So that's where communism basically gets their grassroots. And all the while, we are going to be so fearful of this because we didn't want this whole thing called domino theory to kick in. We did not one country to fall to lead to another country falling to communism in Southeast Asia. Because as you can see here, China already fell, North Korea already fell at this point, and we didn't want to basically have it keep going. So, again, we tried to make sure that communism did not spread, and we failed remarkably, but it did split. So we have North Vietnam, which is communist, led by Ho Chi Minh, and then we have South Vietnam, which is led by this guy, and his name is Dien Diem, if you remember. I can't pronounce it, but still, he was a Democratic guy. But unfortunately, he made a lot of enemies because he did not like Buddhism. He was very open about it because he was Catholic, and the major religion in this area is Buddhism. So, not a good dude. But why this matters is because It's going to lead to bad blood, and people in the South Vietnam didn't like him so much that they actually protested. And this is a famous picture of a monk that set himself on fire to show how much he hated basically what he was doing to the South Vietnam country, I guess you would say at this point. But this is going to be something that's going to spark a heavy attention to us because we're going to send soldiers to South Vietnam just to kind of keep the peace. And while they're there, they're actually going to get fired upon by North Vietnamese troops. So our then president, LBJ, said, "Hey, if you get fired on, you can fire back." So when this all goes down, it's called the Gulf of Tonkin, and then this is what's officially going to start the Vietnam War for us. And we start bombing the snot out of them left and right. But unfortunately, they took it, and they took it for a long time. And there's a lot of like bad things that happened to US soldiers that were fighting in Vietnam. But again, that's an American history thing. What we care about in world history is the effects. So after about 18-ish years of fighting between the North and the South and the United States and the North, we basically left Vietnam. We had this idea called Vietnamization where we're going to start training them to kind of take care of themselves because we wanted to leave. And our then president at the time, Richard Nixon, said, "We got to get a heart out of here." So that's what we did. We let the South to kind of fight for themselves, and the North Vietnamese actually overtook them pretty dang quickly and successfully reunited Vietnam under communist control. So the massive effects for the Vietnam War was more for the United States. Yes, communism spread, but we had a lot of people serve, we had a lot of people die, and we already talked about the treatment of how these soldiers were when we returned. Again, even though this isn't a world history thing, it's an important thing to American history, so I'm still going to plug it in. And all the while, we lost ground during the arms race because the Soviet Union, they weren't fighting, we were. And all the while, the Soviet Union is breaking a lot of treaties that I'm going to talk about later during this time as well. So, true or false? At the conclusion of the Vietnam War, communism stayed out of the South.